Yeah. First of all, thank you, Paul, for inviting me tonight. It was a pleasure. And good evening, everyone. So, as Paul already said, I'm here today to tell you the story about how I learned to code a couple of years ago and how it is somehow related with what I used to do before that. So, first, let me give you some context. Back in 2002, I went to college and studied architecture. And after that, I worked for 5 years in different countries as an architect. I saw some of my projects built, like a community center in Belgium, or this office building in China, or this private house here in Amsterdam, which back then I thought it was a great example of data-oriented architecture. For this special project, we started by identifying the daily routines of our clients, and we asked them, a young couple expecting a child back then, we asked them to describe their perfect day at their ideal home. And after that, we collected all that data and we converted it into daily gadgets, like these ones, that we then gave to the clients, and they had to place them on top of the floor plan, depending on the location that they were going to be located. So these help us to map clients' behavior within the house, and the project resulted in this. There were thick walls that were supposed to be storing all those daily gadgets, and at the same time, the open spaces that you see in between, they were the ones where all those activities were taking place temporarily. And all that was fun, but in the middle of it, I started to date my husband. He's there, and he's a programmer. He's very enthusiastic about what he does, and he's not into web development or anything, but he works in the games industry. And we started to have more and more conversations about programming in general, using strange words like variables, arrays, methods, inheritance, and so on. And that made me extremely, extremely curious until I was totally trapped and finally decided to give it a try. So it was July 2013 when I finally did it. I quit my job as an architect, and it was quite scary. My first thought back then was, okay, let's go back to college. It's everything that I knew at that point. And I looked for universities. I found one that I thought, oh, that might work. I filled in the application form for it, and I ordered some of the books. And when I opened them, I knew that that was not for me. It was not what I really wanted. I wanted to become a web developer, and what I saw in those books, they had nothing to do with it. So lastly, I asked Google, and he gave me hundreds of online resources where you could possibly learn online web development. And it was overwhelming in the beginning, and I didn't know where to start. And I took the time to play around with most of them. So I tried, for example, Skills Crush, which was more marketed to women. I also tried some courses at lynda.com, Pluralsight, and then I also tried some courses at edX, like a Python course. And they were all great, but they didn't give me the boost and motivation that I needed at that point until I met Code School. And now I'll show you around what I did at Code School. I guess most of you know, but just for the ones that they don't. In Code School, they have different paths that you could join depending on what you want to learn there. And in my case, I think coming from the architecture and more design side of the story, I thought like, front end, I think it's what I want. So I started to follow the path that they have about it, about HTML and CSS. And I used to, back then I did everything they had in there. It looks, I'm not there anymore. And I especially like the ones that they have about SAS. So I think it was when I started to play around with SAS and build my very first functions of my life, you know, that I said, oh yeah, maybe this front-end thing, it's okay, but the back-end was already like, okay, maybe, you know, like I could also try the back-end and so on. So for those of you who don't know Code School, I think they are great, and especially their introduction songs, which was very, you know, like for me, it's like, wow, you know, when I saw the guy singing about SAS, you know, like I said, oh wow, you got me. Nothing to do with the books coming from university, or so yeah. And what they have, it's like different levels, and then for each of the levels they have a video, and then you get challenges based on what you learn on that video, and it makes the whole learning experience very, very friendly. So, okay, I was interested at that point in the backend side, but I didn't know which language. So how I made a decision was I searched for the most wanted people in Germany at that moment where I was living. And PHP turned out to be the most desired technology in the area. So there was a problem because in Code School they didn't have PHP. So then by coincidence I met Treehouse. And in Treehouse they do have PHP as one of the tracks. So I joined it. And the first part I already had made it in Code School, so I skipped it and I went directly into the PHP language. And the way they structure it is very good because they started with a very basic web application, an e-store for teachers for Mike, like the frog that they have as a... in the beginning, the web application was not even connected to a database or anything, so it was just like data arrays, you know, and then you were just collecting the data from there. And then progressively they incorporate other concepts like what's database connection and the PDO and so on. And then finally you would be writing that web application also with object-oriented programming and so on. So that was great for me because I could really follow like the different steps, which was not the... And then, okay, that was good. So Code School and then Treehouse. But then still, sometimes I had this feeling of saying, hey, you know, there must be something else. You know, like just these two sides, you know, they are not teaching me everything that I really need, you know, like there's something else. So I was also checking Code Academy at the same time because somehow it gives me the feeling, okay, if, you know, if 3 websites, you know, they are telling you the same thing, they are telling you like the same kind of steps and so on, that must be good, you know, so I'm not missing anything. And in this one, I also follow the HTML, CSS. I played around with JavaScript and PHP and Python a little when I did this edX course that I told you. So, yeah.
Did you know by that time what you wanted to become?
Not really. No. Not really. Like, I was trying to discover at the same time, like, it was very, like, go with the flow, you know. So yeah, online resources was like turned out to be like a great thing for me. It was like a totally whole new world. And as a summary here, I would say that, okay, Treehouse turned out to be very good to give you the big picture. So to help you understand how all the pieces were coming together, Treehouse was perfect for that. In Code School, it's more about going deeper into the concepts. So if you want to learn something and want to learn it good, okay, Code School, they go very deep. And then Code Academy, it's perfect as a complementary thing because they make you write down a lot of code, so you could double check that actually everything that you've been learning in the other ones, you actually know about it. During this time, I found other things to be as important as following those courses. The first one, I had a partner. I had someone that I could talk to. And even though he was not an expert in web development, still he was very useful when my code was broken and I didn't know how to debug, or to have general conversations about programming. The second one, I found it half of the way. So watch tech talks, like the one Paul was saying, and I used to watch one of these talks every day, and they really helped me to keep my motivation on track. And yeah, that's actually how I met Paul. And after that, yeah, I was so, there are some days in which you need someone to tell you, hey, you are doing the right thing, because you're in the middle of that. And Paul was there that day, so thank you for that. The next one is a startup pet project. What you build is definitely not important, but once you have some knowledge, I really found it very useful to have your own thing to play around. And in my case, I found a person online who was interested. He had to prepare himself for a huge exam, and he needed a way of organizing the topics that he had with different questions and different answers. So I made an application for him, and I even did the administrator's part of the website. So that was great. But in this case, this was not even like object-oriented programming or anything. It was everything functional, so. And now when I think about it, it's like, wow, well done. And yeah, this one took me a little bit more time to process. And it's when sometimes there was something that was not really making sense, and you keep trying and trying and trying, and still nothing. Well, leave it. And then really, like suddenly one day you wake up and it makes sense. Like, it's there. And for me, in the beginning, was the idea of a server, just like that, like I didn't have any experience with that before, and then just a server, like the database, and I could not get it, And then also following that Python course in edX, the concept about recursion, and I remember that evening that he was like, no. And now someday, it's there. You get it. And the last one, keep an eye on job descriptions. So I used to have down moments every Sunday afternoon in which I was wondering whether there was someone out there who was actually interested in what I was learning. And that's when I started to check job descriptions. So just double checking every Sunday evening. And 4 months after I started the whole process, I saw a job description in which everything that they had in there, I had already learned it. 2 weeks after that, I was already working at that company. It was for an internship. And that was my first job at the industry. And the nicest thing about it, it's like 1 month after I started to work with them, they promoted me to a junior developer, which was even like more awesome. Some months ago, I moved from Frankfurt to Amsterdam, and in the first weeks in the city, I was actively attending meetups like this one. And in one of them, I met Andrew, who is there today also, and he somehow convinced me of going into Ruby on Rails. And and the way that I learned it, it was very similar to the way that I learned PHP. So I went for it. And some weeks later, I was already having an interview at the Springest, where I'm working at the moment. I've been with them already for 2 months, and I'm impressed about the way it's an education platform online. And I'm really impressed about their way they encourage people to improve themselves and develop themselves, not only through their site, but also within the company. So for example, since week 1, I have a mentor, the CTO of our company, Wouter, and he's responsible for my personal growth plan. So he just helps me and guides me through my learning. I think that's very nice. I didn't have that before. And finally, I'd like to finish with a quote that I'm of a book I'm reading now, in which at some point the author says that master programmers are those who think about systems like stories to be told rather than programs to be written. And having coded with Ruby in the last months have helped me a lot to look at code in this way, because it reads very nicely. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm loving it, because it also reminds me a lot of my life as an architect, in which stories were also like very important. So I'm very happy with that. And that's it. Thank you very much. So now, before we move into questions, we are hiring. So looking for a senior Ruby developer. So if you know someone, please let me know. Also, the CTO at Springest, Wouter, he's organizing a development bootcamp during the second week of July. So if you are interested in learning to code, or you know someone who does, check it out. They also have an open day tomorrow afternoon, so you might want to be there. And also, they are looking for coaches and teachers for that week. So if you're also interested. The CEO of our company, Ruben, he even reserved a spot at our at the Springest for the best student of that week. So that's also another reason to attend. And now, yeah, any questions?
I have a question. Why did you chose web development and not game development like your husband?
I think it's because web development was closer to me. I was not really into gaming. Maybe when I was teenager, he's trying hard, but somehow, And I think it's because also, you have it every day. You are using it every day, and just the idea of not knowing how that's built for me was very like. I said, okay, the worst thing could happen. It's like I don't manage it, but still I would have known how this thing that you are using daily it's been built, So, and also it was very related to the design approach that I had as being an architect. So that also helped me, yeah, to make the decision. Yeah.
If they see you as an that you have some added value, that you
Ah,
can design
yeah.
and code both.
Totally, yeah. I'm not really designing at the moment, but I think that you approach problems in a different way than if you would have approached them if you would have studied computer science. I think like that's another value at the same time. And I'm glad that I'm not designing. So I'm just coding, because that could also have happened, like, no, I want to code.
Yeah, so
Because, yeah. But totally, there's an added value. And it was one of my fears actually when I did it, that imagine like I was writing my CV for that internship, and then, like I had architect projects, like, and then down there was like learning online web development for the past 6 months. And then I thought, no one is gonna call me, like. So somehow, you get the interview also because you are not normal. So the first question I got in the first interview I went was like, hey, I just invited you because I'm extremely curious. Tell me how you did it, and the whole interview was about how I learned to code, like what I learned and that kind of stuff. So that was really like, it really worked.
okay.
Yeah.
But
So don't be afraid of
yeah,
just writing there, like.
Yeah.
And actually, Jose, my husband, was the one like, hey, you have an enormous value that other people don't have, you've been doing other things, you know, so yeah.
How long does it take to learn to code PHP from a zero, let's say?
4 months. It took me 4 months to get my first job.
And how many days, how many hours?
I was full time.
It's like 5 days, from 9 to 6.
Yes, it was like a job.
Okay.
Yeah. You know the Pomodoro technique?
20 minutes?
25 minutes, 5 minutes break. 25 minutes, 5 minutes break. Every 25 minutes you can take 15 minutes break. Yeah. So I was just doing the laundry in between and
Okay.
just always stand up and so yeah. It was I stayed at home also, so for me it was
So you took course online and you just did whatever they say and then...
yeah.
Okay.
And I built this pet project at the same time. That was also very helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And I actually thought that it would take longer. But what I learned from it, I'm using the microphone. What I've learned from it is, you know, because we tend to think like we are not ready, you know, and we tend to think like, hey, no, there's still something else to learn, you know.
And after these 4 months, which level do you achieve? It's like basics, medium, advanced, or...
What I was saying is I applied for an internship, but 1 month later they you know, imagine like the boss says, hey, I need to talk to you, you know, and then after 1 month in the company, you know, like, and then no, it's a good thing, and then you know, you're there in the meeting, and then the boss says, you know, that I've been thinking, like, you are not an intern, like you are a junior developer, so from next month, don't worry, you are not an intern anymore. So, and I think it's also because you've been learning. Imagine that when I ordered those books from university, they were from 2009, 2010, because they were like, okay, you know, programming and so on. But the thing that you get with these websites, I think it's like you get the last thing that it's been used. So you even know more about some of the newest topics than other people within the company. Because you've been, you know, on top of the wave that they say it, you know, like you've been on the way, you know, on the wave, you know, and then people within the company, they don't have time for it. So in a way, I was also introducing new frameworks, you know, that I had been playing around with, or because people within the company, they didn't have time for it. So you could also sell that. Yeah.
I have one more question. I was wondering what your level was before you started. Like, were you always interested in computers and how the web worked? No.
I mean, I remember to, you know, to play around when I was a teenager at home, you know, but not with coding or anything. I never saw any coding. And I also think it's because what I said at the end, like no one told me that it's about stories, you know, and it's about, you know, there's a user, you know, or like there is a, you know, someone there who wants you to go from A to B, you know, and then you just, you know, you write the story about how this person, you know, gets there in, you know, the different difficulties that he might find the way, you know. No one told me that. So then, you know, it looks like also not very human. Yeah. So, but nothing. Coding wise, nothing. So, that's it. Thank you.